The morning sun was pouring across the horizon, painting the streets of suburban Willow Creek amber and gold. The sky was clear, but a slight haze still hung over the rooftops, either from the night's chill or from the autumn fog that was slowly receding under the onslaught of warmth. The quiet of the town was almost sterile, broken only by the chirping of birds and the dull rumble of a garbage truck around the corner. Alex Harper sat behind the wheel of his beat-up blue sedan, a '98 Ford Taurus with a dent in the front fender and peeling paint on the hood. The car hummed at idle like a tired animal, but it was moving, and that was all that mattered. Alex held the wheel with both hands, his fingers tapping absent-mindedly on the rim in time to the music something by Fleetwood Mac was playing on the radio. He was thin, almost wiry, with a casually cropped shock of chestnut brown hair that was already showing the first strands of gray. His brow was permanently furrowed, as if even in repose his mind continued to wrestle with the invisible equations of life. He wore a slightly wrinkled gray cardigan over a light blue shirt and faded jeans, the casual wardrobe of a man whose energies had long been spent not on style, but on survival. Every morning he made this journey from Willow Creek to the nearest town, where his job at a mid-level accounting firm was located, in a windowless concrete box on the third floor of a drab office building. For Alex, this route was like a clock. Every day, the same thing, step by step, toward the point where it all began again. But it was this short morning journey that was his time of silence. A time when no one demanded reports, no one argued over unwashed dishes, no one asked questions like, "Are you happy at all?" He remembered how the night before, Maria, his wife of 9 years, had stood at the sink, her arms crossed over her chest, her eyes tired. A quarrel over something trivial, about the dishes, as always. But there was a weariness in her voice that he couldn't help but hear. Not just irritation, but a real disappointment. Maria was his complete opposite, emotional, determined, with a clear idea of what their life should look like. Tall, with thick chestnut hair pulled back into a neat bun, and eyes that once held so much light. Now there was a shadow of doubt in them. Or maybe regret. Alex sighed. He wasn't a bad person. He was just tired. From the endless tables, from the monotonous evenings, from the feeling that everything he once wanted had now become a cramped cage. He turned off the main street onto the highway. The sun glinted in the rearview mirror. The music on the radio changed, and he turned the volume down a little. There is another day ahead, another ritual, and a vague feeling inside that something has to change, even if he didn't yet know what exactly. He pulled into the parking lot of Cafe Awakening, the local oasis where he began his day. The place was a cozy haven, mismatched wooden tables, strings of warm lights strung across the ceiling, and the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee that enveloped him like a warm hug the moment he walked through the door. Alex came here not only for the caffeine, but also for a brief escape from reality, a chance to feel, for a moment, like something more than a cog in the corporate machine. He parked, grabbed his worn leather briefcase, and stepped out, feeling the crisp autumn air nip at his fingers. Inside, the cafe was buzzing with morning life. In the corner, a couple of students hunched over laptops, their headphones glowing faintly. An older man in a tweed cap read a newspaper at the counter, muttering something about the state of the world. Behind the counter, Casey, a young barista with a streak of bright green in her hair and a smile that could disarm a bear, operated the coffee machine with the precision of a surgeon. Alex loved Casey. She always remembered his order. Black coffee, no sugar, no fuss. "Morning, Alex," Casey called out as she spotted him at the bar, her voice cutting through the soft indie music blaring from the speakers. "The usual." "Yeah, same as always," Alex replied, forcing a half smile and reaching for his wallet. He glanced at his watch, 7:42 m, just enough time to grab a coffee and get to the office before his boss, Karen, began her daily tradition of passive-aggressive emails about punctuality. Casey punched in her order at the register, but suddenly frowned, looking at the screen. That's weird," she muttered, almost to herself. She turned to the checkout counter, where a small white box of pastries and a steaming cup were already waiting. "It looks like your order is ready," But it's for Maria. Alex blinked, his hand freezing on his wallet, as if his brain couldn't keep up with what was happening. Mary? He asked again, frowning. There was genuine bewilderment in his voice. My Maria? I didn't order anything. We don't usually. He paused, unsure how to finish his sentence. Casey, the girl behind the counter, pink-haired, wearing an apron with cacti and pastries on it, shrugged, not paying attention to his confusion. It says here it's paid for. Maria Harper, right? She said, pulling out the receipt. The map ends at 14,721. Everything is fair. Alex nodded slowly. 4,721. Yes, it's their joint credit card. The same one they got before their wedding when they were enthusiastically planning their life together. But something didn't work out. Maria hated the awakening. She said their coffee was as sour as a tax return, and always started her mornings with oatmeal, green tea, and a short jog along the park. And anyway, they hadn't exchanged gifts lately except for the occasional "I washed your dishes" as a gesture of goodwill. And then, a box and a cake? He turned his gaze to the packaging. White, with a neat ribbon and a sticker on which, like a blow to the stomach, the inscription was black. For my tiger. Alex felt his insides tighten. His heart, as if frozen in mid-breath, sank down. Maria never called him that. He said it out loud. For my tiger. The words sounded hollow, almost like someone else's. He repeated them in his head, trying to find some context, some clue that this was about him. But nothing. Emptiness. Casey leaned over to look and raised her eyebrows. Wow. Romantic, huh? She grinned. Perhaps your wife decided to break the ice, you know. A morning gesture of attention. She fell silent, noticing how Alex's fingers turned white on the glass. His face became tense, like a taut string. A shadow appeared in his eyes, not jealousy, not even fear, but something deeper. It feels like the world has shifted slightly off its axis. Are you sure this is from her? He suddenly asked, quietly, almost under his breath. Casey frowned and looked at the check again. Well, order via app. Name is Maria Harper. Binding address matches yours. She hesitated, seeing how he was withdrawing into himself. Do you want me to check the application log? I can clarify where the order was placed. What if it's a bug or an error? But Alex didn't hear any more. He was looking at the inscription as if there was something in it, scary and truthful. My tiger. Such words are not written by accident, and not to a stranger. Alex didn't answer. He picked up the box, opened it, and inside was a perfectly decorated cake chocolate mousse with raspberry icing, topped with a tiny sugar rose. It was beautiful, almost too beautiful, as if someone had taken the time to choose something special. But Maria didn't call him Tiger. Never. Their relationship was more cozy. No passionate nicknames, no kissy face emojis. Their love, if it could still be called that, had long since become a habit, warm, secure, but devoid of sparks. Do you have a receipt? He asked, trying to keep his voice even. Casey nodded and handed him a thin strip of paper. Alex scanned the lines. $12.75 order, paid for on Maria's card at 7:15 am today. He glanced at his watch. Less than half an hour had passed. But Maria should have been at her desk, drinking tea and drawing pencils, not here, ordering cakes with love messages written on them. Are you sure it was today? He asked, without looking up from the check. Casey nodded, her smile fading slightly. Yeah, just before you got here. That's what the system says. Maybe she popped in while you were in the shower. Alex shook his head. She doesn't come out that early, and he trailed off, not wanting to go into detail in front of Casey. But his mind was already racing with questions, each more urgent than the last. Who was the tiger? Why did Maria order that cake? And why the hell hadn't she said anything to him? Okay, he said, forcing a smile. Thanks, Casey. I'll handle it. He took the box and the glass, even though he didn't feel like drinking coffee anymore. His stomach tightened, as if someone had tied it in a knot. He walked out of the cafe, unaware of Casey's curious, slightly anxious gaze following him. Outside, the autumn wind picked up fallen leaves, swirling them around his feet in a dance. Alex got into his car, set the box on the passenger seat, and stared at the sign, "For my tiger." It was so unlike Maria that he almost wondered if it was her card. But the number matched. It was their card. Her card. He started the engine but didn't drive away. Instead, he pulled out his phone and opened his banking app. A quick check of his transactions confirmed Casey's words. A $12.75 purchase at Awakenings, 7:15 am, but that wasn't the only transaction of the morning. Another, for $1.45, at the florist across the street, made it 7:10 am. Alex frowned. Flowers? Maria hadn't bought flowers since they'd picked out a bouquet for her sister's wedding 2 years ago. She always said flowers were a waste of money because they died after a few days. He felt the blood pounding in his temples. His fingers hovered over the screen, wondering if he should call Maria right now. But what would he say? "Hey, you bought a cake for some tiger." It sounded ridiculous, almost funny, but there was a feeling growing in his chest that wasn't funny at all. Jealousy? Distrust? Or just fear that he didn't know his wife as well as he thought? Alex leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes. He remembered how he and Maria had first met at a literary event at the local library, where she'd read her poems, her hair disheveled and her sweater 2 sizes too big. Her voice was shaky, but there was such sincerity in it that Alex couldn't look away. They'd talked all night, sitting on the library steps until the sky had brightened. Back then, she'd seemed like a mystery to him, one he wanted to solve. Now, 7 years into their marriage, he realized that maybe he hadn't figured her out yet. His phone vibrated, yanking him out of his memories. A text from Maria, "Don't forget to pick up milk on the way home. Love you." It was a simple, mundane message, but it only added to his confusion. He looked at the words, "love you," and they seemed foreign to him, as if they had been written by another woman. A woman who bought him cakes with messages on them and flowers in the morning while he slept. Alex set the phone down on the dashboard and took a deep breath. He could drive to the office, pretend nothing had happened, and deal with this evening. Or he could turn around and drive home right now to ask Maria what the hell was going on. But there was a third option, the flower shop across the street. If she was there, someone might see her. Someone might know who the flowers were for, and who the cake was for. He glanced at the box on the seat, at the neat inscription that now seemed almost mocking. "For my tiger." His fingers gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The solution came to him. He pulled out of the parking lot and headed toward the flower shop, feeling something simmer in his chest that he hadn't felt in a long time, a mixture of curiosity, fear, and determination to find out the truth, whatever it was. The flower shop, Bouquet of Dreams, was small but bright, with a window full of hydrangeas and roses that shimmered in the morning light. Alex parked across the street and stared at the sign for a few seconds, trying to collect his thoughts. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, but it was too late to back out. He got out of the car, grabbing the box of pastries as if they were some kind of evidence. Inside, it smelled of damp earth and sweet flowers. Behind the counter stood a middle-aged woman with a kind face and an apron stained with dirt. She looked up from the bouquet she was tying with ribbon and smiled. "Good morning. How can I help you?" Her voice was warm, but Alex barely noticed. "Good morning," he replied, trying to sound casual. My wife, Maria Harper, may have been here this morning, buying flowers. Do you remember, by any chance?" The woman her name tag read Linda thoughtfully tapped her chin. "Maria Harper. That name sounds familiar. Let me think. We had a few orders this morning." She reached for the tablet on the counter and scrolled through the list. "Oh, there you go. Maria Harper, order for a bouquet of peonies and lilies, delivery to..." She paused, glancing at Alex. "Is that your address?" Alex felt the ground shift beneath his feet. "No," he said, too quickly. "Not ours. What's the address?" Linda hesitated, clearly sensing the tension in his voice. "Oh, I'm not sure if I can divulge that. It's confidential information, you know." "This is my wife," Alex said, trying to keep his composure. "I'm just trying to figure out what's going on. Please." Linda looked at him sympathetically, but shook her head. "Sorry, dear. Rules are rules. But I can tell you that she ordered a bouquet around 7 this morning and asked for it to be delivered by noon today. A very nice order, by the way. With a card. She signed it herself." A postcard. Alex felt his throat tighten. "What did it say?" Linda smiled, as if remembering something touching. "Oh, something like, 'You make my heart sing, very sweet.'" Alex stood there, thunderstruck. His heart was singing. It was so different from the way Maria had spoken to him in recent years. Their conversations had been limited to the small stuff bills, shopping, weekend plans. No songs, no tigers. He thanked Linda, though his voice was shaking, and left the store, feeling the world begin to crumble around him. Sitting in the car, he looked at the box of brownies again. His mind raced between explanations. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe Maria was planning a surprise for him, and he had simply misunderstood. But then why a different address? Why tiger? Why flowers? He started the car and drove toward home, deciding it was time to talk to Maria. But deep down, he knew that this conversation could change everything. And as he looked at the road, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life, so familiar and predictable, was about to shatter into 1,000 pieces. The drive home seemed endless, even though it was only a 10-minute drive from the flower shop to their cozy 2-story house in Willow Creek. Alex gripped the steering wheel like it was a life preserver, and the box of brownies in the passenger seat felt like a ticking bomb. The words, "for my tiger," burned into his mind as if burned with acid. He tried to find a logical explanation, but every turn of thought led him into a dark labyrinth of suspicion. Mistake, accident, or something much worse. His mind was torn between wanting to believe the best and the fear that the truth would be bitter. The morning light, so warm and golden an hour ago, now seemed cold, almost hostile. The leaves swirling in the wind reminded him of the fragility of everything he thought was solid. His life with Maria was like those leaves, beautiful, but ready to fall from the branches at the slightest gust. He parked outside his house, but was in no hurry to get out. Instead, he pulled out his phone and opened the banking app again. His fingers trembled as he scrolled through the transaction history, hoping that this was some kind of mistake. But no, it was there, in black and white, a $12.75 purchase at Awakenings at 7:15 m. Then $45 at Dream Bouquet at 7:10 m, both transactions on Maria's card. He scrolled further, looking for anything else that might provide a clue. Another transaction caught his eye, $28.50 at a downtown bookstore, made the previous evening at 6:42 p.m. Maria hadn't mentioned going to the bookstore, even though she loved books and often bought them to inspire her work. But why hadn't she mentioned it? And why had all this spending felt so secret? Alex leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes. He tried to remember how their evening had gone. They had eaten together pasta with pesto, which he had made because Maria had been late in her studio working on a new illustration. She had been distracted, but he had chalked it up to fatigue. Now he wondered if she had even been home at the time. The transaction indicated she was wandering around the bookstore. He felt a cold, prickly feeling in his chest, the first doubt that had begun to poison his thoughts like poison. He got out of the car, taking the box of brownies with him, and headed for the house. It was quiet inside, save for the ticking of the wall clock in the living room, counting off the seconds with irritating regularity. Maria was probably upstairs in her studio, where she spent most of her day, surrounded by pencils, watercolors, and the smell of old books. Alex set the box on the kitchen table and paused, looking at it. He didn't know how to start the conversation. Should he ask her directly? Should he show her the brownie? Or should he wait until the evening to gather his thoughts? But waiting would mean allowing the doubts to take root even more deeply, and he could already feel them growing like weeds. He decided to put off the investigation until the evening. Work waited, and being late would only add to his problems. Alex wrote Maria a short message. "I'll pick up the milk. See you tonight." He didn't mention the cake, the flowers, or his suspicions. Let things continue as usual, at least until he figured out what was going on. The office greeted him with the usual hum. Phones ringing, keyboards clicking, the smell of burnt coffee from the coffee machine in the corner, mixed with something sweet. Someone must have brought cupcakes for a birthday. Everything was in its place, as it should be. Only something shifted inside Alex himself, as if the usual coordinate system had failed. He walked to his desk, trying to look collected. He sat down, turned on his laptop, clicked the mouse a couple of times, opened a spreadsheet with the report for the previous quarter, and then closed it. The damn cells merged into a murky gray mass, as if they were mocking him. "Hey, Harper, you look like you saw a ghost," said Matt, a colleague with two shirts for every occasion and perpetually disheveled hair, leaning back in his chair and looking at him over the monitor. "What, Karen's on you again?" Alex smiled at the corner of his lips. "No, it's just. The morning was strange. You're not alone. I woke up today with the thought that I forgot payday. Can you imagine? Horrible." Matt chuckled and went back to his code or formulas Alex never asked, and Matt never explained. In a way, it was their ideal form of communication, superficial, unobtrusive, with a comfortable level of mutual indifference. Alex was thankful for this. He picked up his phone again, checked his banking app. The transaction was indeed there. $12.89, Awakening Cafe, made at 7:03 am, signed in Maria's name. He opened their family cloud account. Usually there is nothing interesting there. Recipes, scans of documents, photos of Ames, their cat, who always sleeps in unimaginable positions, rare selfies of Maria when she caught good light or tested new brushes in Photoshop. Now it's all the same, perfectly ordinary. Too perfect. He flipped through the photos again. He started searching for keywords. Tiger, Nathan, awakening. Empty. He checked the basket, nothing. He checked recent changes. Everything looked clean. Too clean. It was as if someone was cleaning up their tracks. He found himself looking through Maria's old notes. One contained a list of ideas for a children's book, The Boy Who Was Afraid of His Emotions. In another, a shopping list with an attached photo of an avocado marked, "Too soft, do not buy." Everything seemed to say everything is fine. But inside Alex, the feeling was the opposite. He felt the shadow. Something was slipping away. Like the barely perceptible scent of someone else's perfume on the pillow, not proof, but not an accident either. He closed the laptop and stared into space. "For my tiger." The phrase played in his head like a broken record. He didn't know who the tiger was, but he knew for sure it wasn't him. And suddenly, amidst the office noise and the flickering of windows, he was overcome by a sharp, almost animal feeling. Maria is hiding something. And now he'll prove it, or burn trying. By lunchtime, he couldn't concentrate. He texted Matt that he was taking the afternoon off and left the office, citing a headache. He really wanted to go back to the flower shop, but Linda probably wouldn't say anything more. Instead, he decided to go to the bookstore where he'd made his purchase the day before. Maybe he could find out more there. The Leaf and Quill bookstore was in downtown Willow Creek, an old brick building with a storefront decorated with fairy lights and posters for literary events. The place smelled of paper and ink, and the shelves were filled with books of every genre, from classics to new releases in colorful covers. Behind the counter stood a guy in his 20s with long hair pulled back into a messy bun and horn-rimmed glasses. His name tag read Theo. "Good afternoon," Alex said, trying to speak calmly. "I'm looking for something. My wife, Maria Harper, was probably here last night, buying a book. Can you tell me what it was?" Theo thought for a moment, adjusting his glasses. Maria Harper. The name sounds familiar. Wait, let me check. He turned to the computer and nodded after a minute. "Yeah, right. She bought a book of Rilke's poetry and a novel. Love in the Time of Cholera, I think. Said it was a gift." "A gift?" Alex asked, feeling his heart clench again. "She didn't mention who it was for?" Theo shrugged. "Nah, but she was in a good mood, making jokes about books being the best way to say things you wouldn't dare say out loud. I figured it was probably for someone special. Alex nodded, though inside he was seething. Rilke. Maria loved his poems, but she never bought them for him. And love in the time of cholera? That was a story of passion, of love that outlasted years and distances. Was that for a tiger, too? He thanked Theo and walked out of the shop, feeling the air getting heavier with every step. The evening came too quickly. Alex came home with a carton of milk, as Maria had asked, and a box of pastries he hadn't quite managed to throw out. Maria was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. Her long dark hair was pulled back into a loose bun, and she was wearing an old t-shirt with a paint stain on the sleeve, the same one she liked to work in. It looked so familiar, so close, that for a moment Alex doubted his suspicions. Maybe he was just overthinking it. "Hello," she said, smiling as he walked in. "How's your day?" "It's fine," he replied, putting the milk in the fridge. His gaze fell on the box he had placed on the table. "And yours?" "Oh, the usual chaos," Maria laughed. "The deadline is looming, but I've almost finished the illustrations for the new book. Want to see them?" "Maybe later," he said, trying to keep his voice even. He pointed at the box. "Is this yours?" Maria looked at the box, and her smile faltered, but only for a split second. "Oh, is this from Awakening?" She opened the box and looked at the cake and the inscription. For my tiger. Funny." "Funny?" Alex asked, irritation rising inside him. "Casey said you ordered this morning, paid with our card, and the flowers from Dream Bouquet, and the books last night. What's going on, Maria?" She froze, the knife in her hand hovering over the carrot. Then she slowly placed it on the cutting board and turned to him. Her eyes were calm, but there was something in them that Alex couldn't decipher. "Oh, that," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "It was a surprise. For a colleague. Well, for your colleague's wife, actually. It's her birthday, and I helped with the present. I ordered a cake, flowers, and books. They're for her. She loves Rilke." Alex looked at her, trying to catch even the slightest hint of a lie. "My colleague's wife?" he asked. "Which colleague?" "Matt, I think," Maria said with a shrug. "His wife, Laura. I just used our card because he was having problems with his account. I was going to tell you, but I wanted it to be a surprise." Her explanation made sense. Too much sense. Matt had mentioned that his wife's birthday was coming up, but Alex had never heard of Laura and Maria being close friends. So why a different address for the flowers? And why Tiger? He wanted to ask, but something in her tone, the slight casualness, as if it didn't matter, stopped him. "Okay," he said finally, though everything inside him screamed that this wasn't the end of the story. "It's just weird that you didn't mention it." "I'm sorry," Maria said, coming up to him and touching his hand. "I didn't mean to worry you. I was just trying to do a good deed." She smiled, and it was so familiar, so warm, that Alex almost believed it. But as she turned away to continue cooking dinner, he noticed her fingers trembling slightly. It was subtle, but he noticed it, and it made him doubt it more. That night, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Maria was sleeping next to him, her breathing even, but Alex couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something. He thought about the cake, about the flowers, about the books, about the inscription that haunted him. "For my tiger." If it was a surprise for Laura, why such an intimate inscription? And why had Maria ordered delivery to a different address? He quietly got out of bed, picked up his phone, and walked into the living room. He opened the banking app again, but there were no new transactions. Then he did something he'd never done before. He opened Maria's laptop, which she'd left on the couch. He knew the password. It was their wedding date. The screen lit up, and he froze, feeling like a traitor. But curiosity was stronger. He opened her email, hoping to find something in order confirmation, an email, anything. And there it was. In the sent folder was a letter sent this morning to an unfamiliar address. "See you tomorrow at 2 p.m. as usual. Can't wait." Alex felt the blood drain from his face. His hands shook as he reread the message. The usual. So this wasn't a one-time meeting. He closed the laptop, trying to breathe evenly. His mind was screaming for answers, but he knew that asking directly could ruin everything. Or had everything already been ruined? He went back to the bedroom and lay down next to Maria, but he couldn't sleep. Instead, he imagined how tomorrow at 2 o'clock in the afternoon she would meet someone, a tiger. And the thought was like a knife, slowly piercing his heart. He decided that he wouldn't ask. He would watch. Tomorrow he would know the truth, even if it shattered his world into pieces. The night stretched on forever, like a road leading to nowhere. Alex lay in the darkness, listening to Maria's even breathing, but every breath she took felt like part of a vast, unsolved mystery. The email he'd found on her laptop, "Meet me tomorrow at 2 p.m. as usual. Can't wait." Burned his mind like a hot coal. He lay awake, running through scenarios in his head, each darker than the last. Who was this tiger? What did "as usual" mean? And why did Maria, his Maria, the woman he'd shared 7 years of his life with, suddenly feel so strange? By morning, his eyes were red with fatigue, and his heart was clenched with a mixture of anger, pain, and determination to find out the truth. He rose earlier than usual, trying to move quietly so as not to wake his wife. Maria was asleep, her face buried in the pillow, her dark hair spread across the sheets like ink stains. She looked so vulnerable, so familiar, that for a moment Alex doubted his suspicions. But the letter, the cake, the flowers, they were all real, tangible, like the knife in his pocket. He made coffee, but did not drink it, simply held the mug in his hands as the steam rose to the ceiling, dissolving into the morning gloom. Today he would not go to the office. Today he would find out what was happening. Alex pulled on a dark hoodie he rarely wore and grabbed an old pair of thick-rimmed glasses that had been sitting in a drawer since he'd switched to contacts. He wanted to be invisible, to blend into the crowd, to become a shadow. A plan was spinning in his head, simple but terrifying in its audacity. He would go back to Awakening, the cafe where this strange story had begun, and wait. At 2 p.m., the letter had said. If Maria showed up, he would see her. If she was with someone, he didn't allow himself to finish the thought. Instead, he grabbed his laptop, the newspaper that was lying on the coffee table, and left the house, leaving a note. Left early, office work. Love. The last word came with difficulty, but he wrote it down, as if clinging to the last hope that this was all a mistake. The morning at Awakening was as lively as the previous day, but Alex looked at the cafe with different eyes today. He'd chosen a table by the window in the far corner, where the light fell at an angle, creating a shadow in which to hide. He spread his laptop and newspaper out in front of him and pretended to be engrossed in his work, though the screen remained black. The newspaper, the local Willow Creek Chronicle, served as a screen. He held it in front of him, slightly raised, so that no one would see his face. Casey, the barista with the green streak, glanced at him curiously, but didn't seem to recognize him in this unfamiliar form. Alex had ordered tea instead of his usual coffee, a small thing, but he didn't want his habits to give him away. The clock on the wall ticked with excruciating slowness. 1:30 p.m., 1:45 p.m. Alex could feel the sweat pooling on his palms, despite the cool autumn air seeping through the half-open window. He tried to read the headlines in the newspaper, something about a new park and a city council debate, but the words blurred before his eyes. His attention was riveted on the front door, each jingle of the bell announcing a new customer. Each time the door opened, his heart sank, expecting to see Maria. Instead, it was a student with a backpack, a woman pushing a stroller, an older man ordering a cappuccino, no foam, please. At 1:58 p.m., he felt the air in the cafe grow thicker, as if someone had turned up the voltage. He lowered the newspaper a little so he could see the door, and at that moment she walked in. Maria. Her dark hair was down, slightly curled at the ends, and instead of her usual work t-shirt, she was wearing a dress as simple but elegant dark green that showed off her figure. Alex had never seen that dress before. His stomach dropped, as if someone had punched him in the gut. She looked happy. Her eyes were shining, and there was a small smile on her lips that he hadn't seen in a long time, not the tired, familiar smile she'd given him at dinner, but a lively, genuine one, as if she were anticipating something special. But she was not alone. A man came in behind her. Tall, with broad shoulders and short blonde hair, he looked to be in his mid-30s, maybe a little older. He was wearing a gray jacket and jeans, and in his hands was a small bouquet of peonies tied with a ribbon, the same bouquet Linda from the florist had talked about. Alex felt the blood drain from his face. He lowered the newspaper even lower, almost pressing it to the table, but he could not look away. The man put his hand on Maria's waist, and she pushed him away slightly, laughing, but it was not an irritated gesture, but a playful, almost flirtatious one. They walked to the counter, where Casey was already waiting, smiling, as if she knew them. "Hey, guys," Casey said, her voice as warm as ever. "The usual?" "Yeah," Maria said, her voice ringing like a bell. "Just add a little caramel to my latte today, okay?" The man next to her smiled, leaning closer. "And I'll have your special espresso, Casey. You know how much I love it when you make it." Casey giggled, and Alex felt his fingers curl into fists under the table. He didn't know this man, but his voice, his confident demeanor, his closeness to Maria, it all felt like a hammer blow to his heart. He forced himself to breathe slowly to keep from giving himself away. He couldn't let them notice him. Not now. Not until he realized what was happening. Alex sat motionless. The newspaper in his hands was no longer a cover, but a shield thin and pitiful, but the only thing separating him from the world in which his wife, no, not just his wife, Maria, the woman with whom he had shared a bed, a home, years of his life, was now kissing another man in the very coffee shop where he had once taken her on their first date. He looked down. The white letters on the black and white paper were blurring. Everything sounded muffled, like underwater the grinder, the clinking of cups, the soft laughter from the other table. Alex couldn't believe they were sitting so close, and that she didn't even sense the danger, as if she was sure he wouldn't know. Or worse, that he doesn't care. He turned his head carefully, as if any sudden movement might destroy the delicate balance that kept him from flashing. Maria leaned back in her chair, her hair those reddish strands he loved to untangle with his fingers, now pinned up slightly carelessly. The man said something, and she put her hand on his chest, lightly, as if she had done it 100 times. As if it fine. Alex felt his stomach tighten. Not jealousy, not really. It was betrayal, but not a flash. It was the realization that he was no longer part of her world. He remembered how, a few months ago, he had woken up to her laughing in the other room. At the time, he had assumed she was just talking to a friend. He hadn't gotten up. And now he realized it wasn't just laughter. It was a new life to which he was not invited. He picked up the paper again, just to cover his face. He couldn't afford to be seen. Not yet. Not now. Because now, looking at them, he realized this is more than an affair. Maria was in love. And Alex couldn't lie to himself anymore. Whatever he did next was a turn from which there was no return. Alex forced himself to look away, staring at the laptop screen he hadn't turned on. His thoughts were tangled like wires in an old box. This wasn't a mistake, not an accident. This was the truth he had been afraid to face, but which now lay before him like an open wound. Maria, his wife, the woman with whom he had shared a home, a bed, a life, was sitting a few meters away, holding another man's hand, kissing him, laughing with him in a way she hadn't laughed with him in a long time. He tried to remember when it had all changed. When their conversations had become shorter, their evenings quieter, when her smile had stopped being there for him. He thought about the years they had spent together, the little moments he had taken for granted, the way she would sing along to the radio while making breakfast, the way they would argue about what movie to watch, the way she would fall asleep on his shoulder during long drives. It all seemed so distant now, like memories from another life. Casey passed his table, carrying a tray of dirty dishes, and glanced at him again. This time there was a flicker of recognition in her eyes, but she said nothing. Alex kept his head down, pretending to read the paper. He couldn't afford to be noticed. Not when his world was falling apart, and he was still trying to figure out what to do next. Maria and the man continued to talk, their voices quiet but warm. Alex caught snippets of phrases, something about a trip, a book they were both reading, plans for the weekend. Each word was like a needle prick, but he forced himself to listen, hoping that something would give him a clue. Who was this man? How long has this been going on? And why the hell hadn't he noticed before? At one point, the man pulled a small package wrapped in brown paper from his pocket and handed it to Maria. She smiled, unwrapped it, and pulled out a thin silver chain with a star-shaped pendant. Alex felt his throat tighten. He had given Maria a ring for their 5th anniversary, but she rarely wore it, saying she was afraid of losing it. Now she was accepting gifts from another man, and her eyes were shining in a way they had not for him in a long time. "This is too much," Maria said, but her voice was full of joy, not protest. She slipped the chain on, and the man helped her fasten it, his fingers lingering on her neck a little too long. Alex turned away, unable to watch. He could feel the anger and pain warring inside him, but on top of it all there was a strange numbness, as if his emotions had reached a breaking point and simply shut down. He decided to leave. He couldn't stand to stand there and watch this. He folded the paper, closed his laptop, and stood quietly, trying not to attract attention. Casey was busy at the counter, and Maria and the man were too absorbed in each other to notice him. He walked out of the cafe, the cold autumn air hitting him in the face like a slap. He walked to his car without looking back, but the image of Maria kissing another man was burned into his memory. As Alex sat in his car, he froze, looking at his hands, which were still shaking. He didn't know what to do next. Should he go home, confront her, or continue to pretend he hadn't seen anything until he had more evidence? His mind was screaming for action, but his heart was begging for time to realize that his marriage might already be dead. He started the engine, but didn't move. Instead, he pulled out his phone and opened the Notes app. His fingers hovered over the screen, and then he wrote, 2 p.m., awakening. She was with him, kissing. Gift was a star necklace. It wasn't to forget he could never forget. It was to document the moment his life changed forever. Alex glanced at the cafe through the windshield. Maria and the man were still sitting there, their silhouettes visible through the glass, like a painting from someone else's life. He felt something inside him breaking, but he pushed it down. He wouldn't cry. He wouldn't scream. Not now. He would go home, pretend everything was okay, and start planning his next move. Because despite the pain, despite the betrayal, he wanted to know everything. He wanted to know who this man was, how long this had been going on, and why Maria had chosen him. As he finally pulled away, the car radio began playing an old song about love and loss. Alex turned it off with one sharp movement. He didn't want to hear about love. Not today, maybe never again. Alex drove home, and every turn of the wheel felt like a plunge into an abyss. The image of Maria kissing a stranger in a cafe pulsed in his mind like a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. Her laughter, her hand in his, the silver chain with the star glittering around her neck, it was all real, too real to deny. But instead of giving in to the anger that boiled in his chest, Alex felt a strange calm, cold and sharp as a knife blade. He wouldn't make a scene. He wouldn't yell. He wouldn't hurl accusations. No, he would do it differently. If Maria was playing the game, he would play it too. And he would play it better. As he entered the house, the smell of dinner, tomato sauce, garlic, and fresh basil washed over him like a warm blanket. Almost comforting. Almost false. Alex paused in the hallway for a moment, breathing in the scent, as if hoping the memory of it would displace the image of Maria kissing a stranger in a cafe. It didn't. She could hear her humming from the kitchen, soft and relaxed. He recognized the tune, an old Fleetwood Mac song she liked to play on weekends. He followed the sound, and there she was, in a missing t-shirt with a washed-out print and a paint stain at the hem, her hair pulled back casually, lasagna bubbling on the stove. And the sight of her homie, familiar, seemed almost cruel in its normality. But then he saw chain. Thin, silver, with a small star pendant. He hadn't given it to her, and he knew for sure that she hadn't had it before. He swallowed, clenched his fingers into a fist, and then forced himself to relax. He smiled, as if nothing happened. "Hello," he said, putting his bag against the wall and taking off his jacket. "Smells like your best Italian phrase." Maria turned around. "Hello." Her eyes flashed with their usual warmth, but they faded too quickly. "Yes, you decided to please us. You still love lasagna, right?" "Always," he replied, going to the sink and pouring water. "Although lately it seems to me that you've been experimenting more with vegan things." She chuckled. "Well, you can't feed your family lentils every day." "Are you a family?" The question escaped his lips before he could stop it. Maria froze. For a split second, but it didn't escape him. "Alex, you're acting weird today." "I'm tired, that's all." He took a sip of water. "How are you? How was your day?" "Nothing special. Worked. Walked a bit. Ran into the store." "Have you seen Awakening?" Her hand on the spoon paused for a second. Then she continued stirring the sauce. "Why do you ask?" "It's just. I saw someone eating a cake there. It reminded me of your words. Eating sweets in the morning is a crime against the stomach." She chuckled. "Maybe I'm becoming a criminal. As I get older, it becomes harder to resist caramel." "Who were you with?" he asked directly, looking at her back. "What?" She turned around too quickly, her eyes widening. "You were there, weren't you? Are you following me?" "No, Maria, but you leave traces, and while you think I'm just tired after work, I collect them, one by one." Maria was silent. Tears came to her eyes, but she did not let them come out. "Do you want me to tell you everything?" he asked more quietly. She turned away, closing the oven. "You deserve the truth, but not now." Alex nodded, his voice as even as a cold blade. "Then know this. I don't believe in this show anymore. I ate dinner. I sleep in this bed. But now I know it's all a game, and I won't forget." Silence hung between them, only the bubbling of sauce and the clink of dishes. He sat down at the table and Maria placed a plate in front of him. And they ate like a family. It was as if no one was being torn apart inside. That night, after Maria fell asleep, Alex was awake again. He sat in the living room, in the dark, with his laptop on his lap. The silence of the house was almost deafening, broken only by the occasional sound, the creak of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant bark of a neighbor's dog. His fingers flew across the keyboard as he searched for ways to learn more. He was no tech expert, but years of working with data had taught him to find information where others saw only chaos. He started simple, searching the internet for phone tracking apps. He didn't need anything complicated, just a way to access Maria's text messages, her calls, maybe even her location. After an hour of searching, he came across an app called SpyTrack. It promised undetectable access to messages, calls, and even browser history. Reviews were mixed, but Alex was willing to take the risk. He downloaded the program to his laptop, following instructions that looked suspiciously simple. Installation required physical access to Maria's phone to download the client app. It was risky, but doable. Maria often left her phone in the kitchen while she showered or worked in her studio. The next day, while Maria was upstairs, immersed in her illustrations, Alex took her phone under the guise of checking their shared calendar. His heart pounded as he typed in the password, the same one on her laptop, their wedding date. The screen lit up, and he quickly installed the app, hiding it in a folder of rarely used utilities. Within minutes, SpyTrack was active, syncing with his laptop. He returned the phone to its place, feeling both guilty and justified. It was an invasion of her privacy, but hadn't she done the same to their marriage? That evening, when Maria left for a meeting with a client or so, she said Alex opened his laptop and launched SpyTrack. The program began downloading data, messages, calls, even photos. His fingers shook as he opened the chat folder. There was a lot in there: a chat with an editor, a chat with a friend about a new coffee shop, reminders about deadlines. But one name stood out: J. No last name, just an initial in parentheses. Alex felt the blood pounding in his temples. He opened the chat and began reading. The correspondence began 4 months ago. Alex stumbled upon it by chance, if, of course, You can call it a chance that he had been searching for some traces for weeks, intuitively knowing that something had changed between them. At first, everything seemed harmless. A couple of messages in a messenger about a new book, the same novel that he himself had once recommended to Maria, jokes about the change in the weather, about how November in Chicago leaves no chance for umbrellas and a good mood. Ordinary, friendly words. No signs of trouble. Not in the voice, not in the wording. But over time, the tone changed. Slowly, like the temperature of the water in which the frog is boiled. He read, I miss your smile. Today would be easier if you were here. You make my days brighter. I don't know how I coped before you. Word, too, pierced him especially sharply. Before him. Before their marriage. Before the children. Before their common home. He scrolled further. Photos. Maria and that man Jay. He had a name now against a park bathed in amber light, hands intertwined. Not just a stroll intimacy. Intimacy. Those eyes that had once reflected him were now looking at someone else. He saw her smile, a real, carefree smile, one he hadn't seen her smile since Emily was probably in kindergarten. In a world where betrayal is the norm, we choose to be different. We show those who did not cheat, who did not sell, who remained faithful to himself, his country, his principles. If you are one of them, this channel is for you. Subscription is your support. Like is your sign. I'm with you. He read on. You told me I didn't need to be afraid, that I had the right to be happy. But while I'm with him, it's like I'm living a lie. Maybe we should just end this gently, without any drama. Say that we're tired, that the feelings are gone, that this is mutual. And here it is, mutual. As if everything they spent years building could be closed like a browser tab, quietly, without pain, without truth. Alex leaned back in his chair, his hands clenched into fists. His heart pounded dully, like an alarm. He felt like a traitor to his own life, as if all this time he had been eating at the same table with her, sleeping next to her in the same bed, and she had been living another life in which he had been just a background. But he stopped the anger rising in a wave. He stifled it, because rage without action is fire in a closed space. He knew, now he must not scream, he must not tear, he must not break. Now we need to think. Plan. Collect everything. To understand what Jay wants. What Maria tells the children. What else she hides from him. Because he won't allow himself to be thrown out of his own life under the guise of quietly breaking up. He won't give it to him directly after his disappearance. And if Maria decided to play a double game, she hasn't yet realized how well he can read between the lines. He continued to study the data. SpyTrack showed that Maria and Jay met regularly, 2 or 3 times a week, usually at Awakening or a small park on the outskirts of town. There were calls, brief but frequent, usually late at night when Maria said she was working. There were even location logs, the app recording where Maria's phone was at certain times. One place kept repeating itself more than others, the Twilight Motel on Route 17, 30 minutes outside of Willow Creek. Alex knew the place, an old, slightly run-down building with a neon sign that he and Maria had passed on their visits to her parents. The thought of her there with another man was almost unbearable, but he forced himself to continue. The next step was to bug the house. He wasn't a spy, but the internet was full of instructions, and desperation made him resourceful. On one forum, he found a guide to installing miniature microphones that could be connected to Wi-Fi and listened to via an app. He ordered a kit online, choosing next-day delivery, and paid with his personal card so Maria wouldn't suspect anything. The microphones were small, about the size of a button, and could be hidden in discreet places behind a painting in the living room, under the kitchen table, even in their bedroom. The thought of eavesdropping on his own wife made him sick, but he reminded himself that she had broken their trust first. While he waited for the delivery, Alex began gathering more information about Jay. His full name wasn't in the messages, but one mentioned that he worked at a gallery downtown. Alex remembered that Maria had mentioned several exhibitions she attended for work. He found the website of the Moonlight Gallery, where Maria sometimes showed her illustrations. The About page listed the staff, and there he saw him, Jason Keller, the curator of exhibitions. The photo was of the man from the cafe, blonde hair, a confident smile, eyes that seemed to know more than they were saying. Alex felt his fists clench. Jason Keller. Now his enemy had a name. He started looking for Jay on social media, but he was wary his profiles were private, and there were almost no public posts. But Alex found an old post on the gallery's account, where Jason was tagged at an exhibition opening. Maria was standing next to him, her hand on his shoulder, and the caption read, "Thank you, Maria Harper, for the amazing illustrations." That was 6 months ago. 6 months. So their relationship began even earlier than the correspondence indicated. The microphones arrived the next day, hidden in an inconspicuous box labeled electronics. Alex waited until Maria left for a client meeting and set them up around the house. One behind a framed wedding photo in the living room, one under the kitchen table, one behind a bedside lamp in the bedroom. He connected them to an app on his phone and tested them by whispering into an empty room. The sound was clear, too clear. He felt like a traitor, but that feeling was drowned out by his determination to find out the truth. That evening, when Maria returned, Alex watched her with new attentiveness. She was the same, cooking dinner, making jokes, asking about his day. But now he could see the cracks in her facade. The slight pause before she answered, the glance that looked away too quickly, the nervous gesture as she fiddled with her star necklace. She didn't know that he knew, and that gave him an advantage. Late that night, after Maria had fallen asleep, he turned on the microphone app. She spoke into the bedroom phone, thinking he was in the shower. Her voice was quiet, but the microphone picked up every word. "I'm tired of pretending, Jay," she said. "I want to be with you, but I don't know how to do it without hurting him. Should I just tell him we both want to move on?" Alex turned off the app, his heart clenching. Not to hurt him. As if that was possible. As if her betrayal wasn't already a knife in his back. He lay down on his bed, staring at the ceiling, and swore to himself that he wouldn't let them get away that easily. He would gather all the evidence, learn all their plans, and then he would decide how to respond. The game was on, and he wasn't going to lose. The silence in the house was deceptive, like the calm before a storm. Alex sat at the kitchen table, sipping cold coffee as the morning light poured through the curtains, casting long shadows across the floor. His mind was a chessboard, each move carefully calculated, but the outcome unclear. Maria's text to Jay, the overheard conversations, the star necklace glittering around her neck, all of it formed a mosaic of betrayal he couldn't ignore. But rather than rush into battle with accusations, Alex decided to play it more subtle. He wanted Maria to reveal herself, to let her lies crumble under the weight of the truth. And to do that, he needed the perfect moment, the perfect scene. A family dinner with Maria's parents, her sister, their friends would be that scene. He would spin it as big news, so she wouldn't suspect a trick. But the news he was about to deliver would not be what she expected. The idea had come to him that night as he lay in the dark, listening to Maria breathe softly in her sleep. Her words, overheard through the microphone about a quiet breakup, about not hurting him, still echoed in his head like a persistent melody. He realized that confronting her directly would give her a chance to wriggle out of it, to hide behind another excuse like she had done with the writing on the cake. No, he wanted her trapped, surrounded by people who knew them as a couple, as a family. He wanted her mask to crack in front of everyone she cared about. This wouldn't be just a dinner, it would be a performance, with him as the director and Maria an unwitting actress. The morning began with a routine, but for Alex, every gesture was part of a plan. He made breakfast avocado toast and eggs, which Maria loved, and set the plates on the table casually, as if nothing had changed. Maria came downstairs, her hair pulled back into a messy bun, and wearing the same old paint-stained t-shirt. She looked tired, but her smile was warm, almost genuine. Alex saw her absent-mindedly touch the star necklace around her neck, and the movement pricked him like a needle. He suppressed a flash of anger and smiled back. "Good morning," he said, pushing a plate towards her. "Did you sleep well?" Yeah, she replied, sitting down at the table. Although I had some nonsense about deadlines in my dream. How are you? Okay, he said, stirring his coffee. Listen, I was thinking, maybe we could have a family dinner. It's been a while since we've all gotten together. Invite your parents, Sarah, maybe a few friends. What do you say? Maria froze, her fork halfway to her plate. Her eyes narrowed for a moment, as if she were trying to discern his intentions. Dinner? She asked, a hint of wariness in her voice. What's the occasion? Alex shrugged, trying to look relaxed. I just felt like it. Plus, I have some news I wanted to discuss with everyone. Nothing major, just thought it would be fun to get together. She looked at him carefully, and he felt his heart skip a beat. He knew she was trying to figure out if he knew something, but years of marriage had taught him to read her, and he kept his face neutral, as if he were talking about the weather. Finally, she nodded, looking away. Sounds good, she said, returning to her toast. Who should we invite? Mom and Dad, Sarah, maybe Lisa and Tom. Exactly, Alex agreed, feeling the tension inside him ease a little. And maybe Matt and Laura? We haven't seen them in a while. Maria froze again, but so quickly that only the person looking could notice. Yeah, we can, she said, her voice a little quieter. When do you want to arrange it? How about Saturday, he suggested, taking a sip of coffee. We'll give everyone a couple of days to get ready. She nodded, but Alex noticed her fingers fiddling nervously with the corner of her napkin. She was wary, which only made him more certain that he was on the right track. He didn't know what news he'd announce at dinner, but he knew he was going to use the evening to expose her. Maybe he wouldn't accuse her of cheating outright. Maybe he'd just ask questions that would make her tangled up in her own lies. Or maybe he'd do something unexpected, something that would force her and Jay to come clean to everyone. Alex spent the next 2 days in a frenzy of preparation. He called Maria's parents, Helen and Richard, and invited them, adding that he had something important to share. Helen, always a fan of family gatherings, enthusiastically agreed, immediately planning what kind of pie she would bring. Richard, more reserved, simply muttered that he would do it if Maria wanted. Maria's younger sister, Sarah, was thrilled with the idea of dinner, promising to bring her new boyfriend, whom no one had yet seen. Lisa and Tom, old friends from college, also confirmed their attendance, although Lisa joked that she was hoping for juicy news. Matt and Laura, Alex's co-worker and wife, agreed without hesitation, although Alex noticed that Matt sounded a little confused when he mentioned that Maria had helped Laura with a surprise birthday party. Meanwhile, Alex continued to gather information. SpyTrack worked flawlessly, intercepting every message, every call. Maria's correspondence with Jay became even more revealing. They were discussing dinner, and Maria wrote, Alex is up to something, but I don't know what. He mentioned the news. Maybe it's about work? I'm nervous. Jay responded, hang in there, kid. If he knows something, we'll figure it out. Just don't panic. That kid cut Alex like a knife, but he forced himself to read on. In another message, Maria mentioned wanting to do this right, so that no one gets hurt more than they have to. Alex gritted his teeth, feeling anger mingle with cold determination. She wanted to protect his feelings. After lying to him for months, it was almost funny. The microphones in the house were paying off, too. That night, when Maria thought Alex was asleep, she talked to Jay on the phone, standing by the living room window. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but the microphone picked up every word. I don't know how long I can hide this, she said. He looks at me differently. Maybe he suspects something. But I can't just leave. Not now. Jay said something reassuring, but Alex didn't listen any further. He turned off the app, feeling his heart squeeze. She was afraid he suspected. Fine. Let him be afraid. It meant she wasn't as confident in her game as she thought. Alex also began to dig deeper into Jason Keller's life. He found his profile on a professional networking site, where he listed himself as a curator at the Moonlight Gallery for 3 years. He was divorced, childless, and judging by his social media posts, he led an active life exhibitions, travel, partying with the bohemian crowd. Alex imagined Maria, with her love of art and books, falling under his spell. Jason was the polar opposite of Alex, not a buttoned-up accountant, but a man who lived in a world of color, ideas, and passion. This only made him more determined. He would not let this man steal his life. By Saturday, the house had been transformed. Alex insisted on doing the cooking himself, although Maria had suggested ordering in food from a restaurant. He wanted everything to be perfect, not to please her, but to create an atmosphere in which she would feel safe and then vulnerable. He cooked a roast with herbs, baked potatoes with rosemary, and made a salad with goat cheese and walnuts. The table was covered with a white tablecloth, and in the center stood a vase of flowers, an ironic nod to the bouquet Maria had ordered for the tiger. He even played their favorite music, the old jazz they had listened to in the early years of their marriage, to create the illusion of coziness. The guests began to arrive around 6 o'clock. Helen and Richard were the first to arrive, bringing homemade apple pie and a bottle of wine. Helen hugged Alex, her eyes shining with joy, and Richard shook his hand with his usual restraint. Sarah showed up with her boyfriend, Kyle, a lanky guy with forearm tattoos and an unexpectedly soft voice. Lisa and Tom arrived with a bottle of whiskey and joked about how rarely they got out of the house anymore because of their kids. Matt and Laura were the last, and Alex saw Maria exchange a quick glance with Laura that could have been anything from friendly warmth to a secret signal. He pretended not to notice. Dinner began lightly, with conversations about the weather, work, and holiday plans. Alex played the role of gracious host, pouring wine and throwing light jokes into the conversation. But his eyes were on Maria. She was tense, though she tried to hide it. Her laughter was a little louder than necessary, and her fingers fiddled with the star necklace. When Sarah asked what the big news was, Alex smiled and said, "You'll find out soon enough. Let's eat first." Maria gave him a questioning look, but his smile only widened. The conversations flowed, but Alex was waiting for his moment. He wasn't sure exactly how the evening would unfold, but he had a few moves prepared. In his jacket pocket was a small tape recorder on which he had recorded the part of Maria's conversation with Jay that he had overheard, the one where she had talked about breaking up quietly. He wasn't sure if he would turn it on, but the idea that he could gave him a strange sense of power. He had also printed out a screenshot of their text messages, the one where Jay had called her babe, and offered to sort this out if Alex knew anything. It was his ace up his sleeve. When dessert was served, Elena's pie and ice cream Alex had bought especially for this evening, he decided it was time. He tapped his glass with his spoon, getting everyone's attention. Everyone fell silent, looking at him curiously. Maria tensed, her hands still on the table. "Thank you for coming, everyone," Alex began, his voice calm, but inside he could feel the adrenaline pumping through his temples. "I wanted to gather you all because I do have news. But before I announce it, I want to say how much this family, these friends, means to me, and especially Maria." He looked at her, and her eyes met his. There was a mixture of fear and hope in them, as if she was afraid he knew, but hoped he just wanted to say something nice. Alex smiled, but his smile was cold as ice. He knew this was the turning point. The game was on, and he was ready to make his next move. Dinner flowed slowly, like a river on a calm day, but beneath the smooth surface there was a turbulent funnel ready to swallow up everything that seemed stable. The table, like an illusion from an advertising brochure, was bursting with treats. Medallions of veal in red wine, crispy potatoes with sea salt, a green salad with pine nuts, beetroot sauce, and goat cheese, homemade crusty bread still warm from the oven. Thin glasses of shimmering ruby wine clinked each time someone clinked glasses to health, to old friendships, to a delicious dinner. Laughter floated in the air like smoke from candles, giving the evening a cozy, almost fairy tale atmosphere. Alex sat at the head of the table as befits the host. He smiled, made conversation, and poured wine. Jokes. Got up for salt. Offer more salad. Everything looked perfect. Perfect. Not true. He scanned everyone as if his eyes were a targeting device. He knew there was one actress here, and he was the only one who could see the cracks in her makeup. Maria, in her wine-colored dress, her teardrop earrings, her neatly coiffed hair, and her practiced, social smile, was the epitome of a hostess. She showered compliments, laughed softly but sincerely, or rather, the way it should look sincere. But Alex did, the movement of his fingers that slid across his glass too often, the look that lingered on his face for a split second when he mentioned his first vacation to Oregon. A blink too short, a breath too deep. She was on the edge. Shay was afraid, and this trembling only fueled his determination. Helen, Maria's mother, spoke of making cups on a potter's wheel with such enthusiasm as if she were talking about the revival of an art. I named one patience, she laughed, because I made it 4 times and it was crooked every time. The laughter was genuine. Even Alex allowed himself to smile. For a second, he almost believed that they were family, that everything he had seen and read was just the ravings of a paranoid person. But then Maria leaned toward her sister and whispered something. Too quietly, too quickly, and Alex tensed again. Sarah chartered away, and her boyfriend Kyle listened with amazing politeness. He told her about his compass tattoo, so I don't get lost in life, and even Helen laughed. Matt and Laura vied with each other to recall embarrassing moments from the last office party. And then he fell off the table but kept singing, Laura said, and everyone burst out laughing. Only Alex wasn't laughing. His eyes were on Maria. She was laughing too, out of habit. She was in her element. He was the only one who knew it was a show. He reached for the bottle of wine. Maria, please pass it on. She shuddered slightly, took the bottle, but before handing it over, she asked, Don't you want white? It seems you always drank white with meat. He looked into her eyes. I've changed a lot lately. His voice was soft, but there was steel underneath the words. She didn't answer, she just nodded. The others didn't notice anything, but between him and her, there was silence. Alex took a sip. The meat tasted perfectly cooked, but he could barely smell it. His mind was elsewhere. He was looking, listening, and feeling. This was reconnaissance, psychological warfare. He knew he couldn't sit at this table for much longer and pretend everything was okay. He waited for the right moment, like a predator lurking in the tall grass. His plan was risky but well thought out. The day before the dinner, he contacted Casey, the barista at Awakenings, and under the guise of a surprise for his wife, persuaded her to install a small hidden camera in the cafe, a cheap model bought online, disguised as a charger. Casey, though surprised, agreed, thinking it was part of some romantic gesture. The camera captured Maria's encounter with Jay, their laughter, their kiss, the moment he gave her the star necklace. The video was short but devastating, like lightning. Alex also prepared a printout of the correspondence, which he downloaded via SpyTrack, a series of messages in which Maria and Jay discussed their encounters, their feelings, their plans. The most poignant was a message from her. When I'm with you, I feel alive. With him, I haven't felt that way for a long time. The words burned him, but he saved them for this moment. When dessert was served, Ellen's apple pie and ice cream with caramel sauce, Alex felt the time had come. He tapped his glass with his spoon, and the sound echoed through the room, silencing everyone. The guests turned to look at him, their faces alight with curiosity. Maria sat opposite him, her fingers fiddling with her napkin, her eyes fixed on him. She knew he was about to announce news, and from the tenseness of her posture, she feared he knew more than he was letting on. Friends, family, Alex began, his voice even, but inside he could feel the adrenaline pumping through his temples. Thank you for all of you being here. This evening, it's important to me. To us. He paused, looking at Maria, and saw her lips twitch slightly. I want to raise a toast to what really matters, honesty, trust, and family. He raised his glass, and the guests followed suit, smiling and nodding. Helen even wiped away a tear, whispering to Richard, how sweet he is. But Maria was not smiling. Her hand, holding the glass, froze in midair, and her eyes searched his face for a clue, a hint of what he was planning. Alex continued, his voice a little firmer. Honesty is what holds us together. Without it, a family is just people living under the same roof. Trust is something we build over the years, and it can crumble in an instant if someone decides to lie. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. The guests began to look at each other, sensing that the toast was taking an unexpected turn. Sarah frowned, and Lisa glanced at Tom, as if asking what was going on. Alex set the glass down on the table and leaned over to get something from under the chair. All eyes were on him as he pulled out a white box, the one from Awakening, with the words, "For my tiger," written on it. Maria went pale, her hand twitching as if she wanted to grab the box, but she held back. Alex slowly set the box down on the table, right in the center, next to the vase of flowers. "Remember this?" he asked, addressing Maria, but his voice was loud enough for everyone to hear. "Funny story, I stopped by Awakening a couple days ago, and Casey gave me this. Said it was in your name, Maria. Paid with our card." He opened the box, revealing the cake chocolate mousse with raspberry icing, still perfect despite days in the refrigerator. "For my tiger," he read aloud, his voice cold as ice. "I wonder who the tiger is." The guests froze. Helen looked at Maria with alarm, Richard frowned, and Sarah opened her mouth but made no sound. Maria tried to smile, but her smile was tense, like a string about to snap. "Alex, it was just a surprise," she began, but her voice was shaking. "I told you it was for Laura, for her birthday." Laura, sitting next to Matt, looked stunned. "For me?" she asked. "But my birthday was 3 months ago." Alex nodded, as if he had expected this. "Yeah, it's weird, right?" he said, taking his phone out of his pocket. "But that's not all. I thought maybe it really was a misunderstanding, so I asked Casey to help me with a little experiment." He plugged the phone into a small projector he'd placed on the sideboard earlier and pressed play. An image appeared on the living room wall, grainy but clear. It was a hidden camera video from Awakenings. Maria and Jason Keller were sitting at a table by the window. Their hands were intertwined, their faces were glowing. The camera captured the moment he gave her the star necklace, and then their kiss, brief but tender. The guests gasped, Helen covered her mouth, and Richard clenched his fist. Sarah looked at her sister with such shock that she seemed on the verge of tears. "Alex, turn it off," Maria said, her voice hoarse, almost pleading. "It's not what you think." "Not that?" he asked, his voice rising. "Then maybe this explains it." He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and unfolded it. It was a printout of the correspondence he'd found through SpyTrack. He picked out the most explicit messages and read them aloud, his voice shaking with suppressed anger. "When I'm with you, I feel alive. I haven't felt that way with him in a long time." "You wrote that, Maria, to Jay, 4 months ago. Or is that a misunderstanding, too?" The room fell silent, so heavy that the air seemed thick as tar. Maria stared at the table, her face white as the tablecloth. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words stuck in her throat. Helen began to cry, and Richard put his hand on her shoulder, but his eyes were full of disappointment. Sarah stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "Maria, is it true?" she asked, her voice shaking. You cheated on him." Maria looked up, her eyes shining with tears. I didn't mean for this to happen," she whispered. "It was a mistake. I got confused." "Confused?" Alex repeated, his voice full of bitterness. 4 months of dating, a motel on Route 17, plans to quietly separate from me. That's not confused, Maria. That's a choice." The guests were silent, shocked. Lisa and Tom looked at each other, unsure what to say. Matt cleared his throat, trying to lighten the mood, but Laura stopped him with a look. Helen sobbed louder, and Richard finally spoke, his voice low and stern. "Maria, how could you? Alex was like a son to you. We all loved you." Maria covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone." Alex looked at her, his anger beginning to give way to weariness. He had done what he had planned, exposed her lies, forced her to confront the truth. But the victory had brought no relief. Instead, he felt empty, as if something vital had been ripped out of him along with her betrayal. He placed the printout on the table next to the pastry and stood up. "I don't know what's going to happen next," he said to everyone. "But I can't live with a lie. Thank you for coming. I think that's all for dinner." He walked out of the living room, leaving behind him silence and shocked faces. Maria did not follow him. No one did. He went up to the bedroom, closed the door, and sat on the bed, looking at their wedding photo on the bedside table. He knew that this evening would change everything. The game was over, but the price of truth was higher than he expected. The silence that fell in the living room after Alex left was heavy, as if the air had thickened to tar. The table, once full of laughter and warmth, now felt like an altar on which the illusion of a happy marriage had been sacrificed. The box of brownies in the center looked like evidence in a court of law, and the words, "for my tiger," seemed like a mockery of everyone gathered in the room. The projector was still showing a frozen image from the cafe. Maria and Jason, their hands intertwined, their smiles bright, as if the world belonged to them alone. The printed correspondence lay next to the brownie, its corner curled slightly in the damp air, but the words on it were clear, undeniable. The guests sat as if petrified, their faces expressing a mixture of shock, anger, and awkwardness. No one knew what to say, but all eyes were on Maria. She sat with her head down, her hands shaking as she clutched the napkin that had already become a ball. Tears were streaming down her cheeks, leaving dark mascara streaks, but she made no attempt to wipe them away. Her shoulders were shaking as if she wanted to shrink, to disappear, to melt into this room full of people who had just witnessed her disgrace. Helen, her mother, looked at her with pain, her own eyes full of tears. Richard, Maria's father, sat motionless, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. Sarah, the younger sister, had jumped up from her chair, her expression a mixture of anger and disbelief. Lisa and Tom, their friends, looked at each other, unsure of how to react, and Matt and Laura, Alex's co-worker and wife, looked like they wanted to sink into the ground. The dinner, which began as a family celebration, turned into a scene from a drama, where everyone felt like an unwilling spectator. "Maria," Sarah finally said, her voice shaking with emotion. "How could you? You really did that? Cheated on him? All this time?" Maria looked up, her eyes red, but she tried to pull herself together. "Sarah, I didn't mean for this to happen," she began, her voice hoarse, almost broken. "It was a mistake. I was confused. I didn't know how." "A mistake?" Sarah interrupted, her voice rising. 4 months, Maria. 4 months of lying to him, lying to all of us. You sat there, smiling, pretending everything was okay, and then—" She trailed off, choking on her anger, and turned to Kyle, her boyfriend, as if seeking support. Kyle put his hand on her shoulder, but his expression remained neutral, as if he didn't want to get involved in the family storm. Helen sobbed, her voice barely audible. "Maria, my daughter, why didn't you tell us? We could have helped. We could have—" She fell silent, covering her face with her hands. Richard put his arm around her, but his gaze was stern as he looked at his daughter. "You broke his heart," he said, his voice low as thunder. "Alex was like a son to us. He deserved better. We all did." Maria opened her mouth to reply, but the words caught in her throat. She looked at the printout of the messages, at the cake, at the projector that was still showing her and Jay, and her face twisted in despair. "I know it's my fault," she said finally, her voice almost a whisper. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. Jay, he was just— I don't know how to explain it. I felt lost, and he—" "Lost?" Lisa asked, her voice thick with skepticism. "Maria, you had a home, a husband, a family. If you were lost, why didn't you talk to Alex? Why did you choose this?" She pointed to the projector, where the frozen frame still hung like an accusation. Maria shook her head, tears falling onto the tablecloth. "I tried," she said, "but with Alex, everything became so routine. We stopped talking, stopped seeing each other. I'm not making excuses, I don't know how it happened." "You don't know?" Tom asked, his voice softer, but bitter. You met that guy at the motel, Maria. You planned to dump Alex, pretend it was a mutual decision. It didn't just happen. It was a choice. Maria covered her face with her hands, her sobs growing louder. The guests were silent, unsure how to respond. The awkwardness was building like static electricity, and everyone felt out of place. Matt cleared his throat, trying to clear the air. Maybe we should give you two some time to figure this out, he suggested, but Laura gave him a look that said, "Shut up." At that moment, the door to the living room opened and Alex returned. His face was calm, but there was a cold fire in his eyes that made everyone freeze. He didn't look broken or confused, he looked like a man who had made a decision. In his hands he held a folder, thin but weighty, as if it contained the fate of their marriage. He stopped at the table, his gaze moving over the faces of the guests, lingering on Maria. She looked up at him, her eyes full of tears, but there was a spark of hope in them, as if she thought she could still fix everything. "I'm not going to drag this out," Alex said, his voice even but with steel in every word. "I wanted you all here because you're our family, our friends. You deserve to know the truth, and I deserved it too." He opened the folder and pulled out a piece of paper, which he placed on the table next to the cake. It was a document printed on official letterhead with a signature and a seal. "This is a divorce petition," he said, looking straight at Maria. "I filed it this morning. Everything is already formalized. You can pick up your things tomorrow." Maria gasped, her hand pressing to her chest as if she were trying to hold on to her heart. "Alex, please," she whispered. "We can talk. We can." "Talk," he interrupted, his voice sharper. "About what, Maria? About how you dated another man for 4 months? About how you planned to quietly break up with me so that I wouldn't even realize I'd been betrayed? About how you lied to me, lied to all of us?" He gestured at the guests, who sat there, not daring to move. "No, Maria, the talking is over. You've made your choice, and now I'm making mine." Helen began to cry louder. Richard hugged her tighter, but his face was stony. Sarah looked at her sister with such pain that it seemed she was about to burst into tears. Lisa and Tom were silent, their hands clasped under the table. Matt and Laura looked like they wanted to disappear, but their eyes were fixed on Alex. Maria stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "Alex, I know it's my fault," she said, her voice shaking but determined. "But I didn't want it to end this way. I loved you. I still." "Don't," he said, holding up his hand. "Don't talk to me about love. Love doesn't lie. Love doesn't hide in motels. Love doesn't write for my tiger on another man's cakes." He paused, his gaze heavy as lead. "You can say whatever you want, but I've seen it all. I know it all, and I don't want to be part of that lie anymore." He turned to his guests, his face softening, but only slightly. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I'm sorry the evening ended this way, but I think you understand why I did it. Now," he paused, his lips curling into a bitter smile, "enjoy your meal." With that, he turned and walked out of the living room, leaving behind him a silence that was louder than any shout. The door closed behind him with a soft click, but the sound echoed through the room like a gunshot. The guests sat motionless, their eyes darting between Maria, the cake, and the document on the table. Helen was sobbing into Richard's shoulder. Sarah went to her sister, but paused, unsure whether to hug her or scold her. Lisa and Tom began quietly gathering their things, clearly eager to leave. Matt and Laura followed suit, muttering something about going. Maria was left alone at the table. The hum of voices, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, all this had already disappeared, like a stage from which the curtain had been hastily torn down. Silence hung in the air, filled with the barely audible ticking of a clock and the smell of cooling lasagna. There were papers on the table, next to an overturned glass of wine. A divorce paper. Her name, his name. The legal language was clear. She reached out and took them, but they were cold as ice. The lines blurred before her eyes. She blinked. Tears. But not from surprise, she knew this moment would come. She just didn't think it would be so quiet, so final. Her gaze fell on the plate, where half the cake remained. The cream had melted slightly from the heat. The words, "for my tiger," had run slightly, as if it had burst into tears. Maria ran her finger over the letters. A stupid romantic joke, once thought sweet. Now a mockery, a symbol of what she had lost. Not only Alex, not only her family, and myself, a woman who once believed that she could hold on to everything, control everything. She clenched her fingers in her lap, trying to stop herself from shaking. Faces appeared before her eyes: Emily, with a stubborn glint in her eyes; Lucas, silent and distant, as if he had understood everything before anyone else. And of course, Alex. His face was stony, reserved, but his eyes, they had everything: pain, betrayal, anger, fatigue. She couldn't forget them. The door creaked upstairs. Alex. He left without even looking back. He didn't slam the door, didn't say the last word, because everything had already been said. He handed her the divorce like a knife with a note. Decide for yourself whether to cut yourself or to continue cutting. And she knew he was right. Everything that happened quote, as her fault. Maria ran her hand over her face, wiping away the tears. Then she stood up, carefully folded the papers, and headed to the office. No hysterics, no scene, only silence and a gnawing sense of loss. Alex sat on the edge of the bed. The light from the nightlight cast soft shadows on the walls. His palms rested on his knees, and his gaze was fixed on a point on the floor. He didn't cry. He didn't feel relieved. He didn't feel victory. Only a heavy silence inside. But it was honest silence. Not a lie, not a pretense. He remembered how it all began, how he fell in love with Maria, how they dreamed together, built, believed. He remembered holding Emily in his arms in the maternity hospital, how he taught Lucas to ride a bike. All of this was present. And then cracks, unsaid things, fatigue. And in these cracks, Maria found someone else. And she left not in body, but in soul. And he tried not to notice it. For too long. Now everything is different. Tomorrow will not be easier. He will wake up in an empty house. He will not hear her steps, her voice, her laughter. But there will be truth in it, and it is better than living in an illusion. He stood up and went to the window. There was a city beyond, quiet, gloomy, but alive. There was something right about that. Alex took a deep breath. Tomorrow a new chapter begins. Without Maria, without lies, without illusions. Only him, only the truth, only further. The morning after dinner was gray, as if the sky above Willow Creek had decided to reflect the mood of the Harper house. Fog clung to the bare branches of the trees, and the air smelled of dampness and fallen leaves. Alex woke early, although he had barely slept for a couple of hours. The bed next to him was empty. Maria had spent the night on the living room couch, and he hadn't bothered to wake her. He didn't want to see her face, didn't want to hear her voice, which was still echoing in his head, full of excuses and tears. The night before, with its revelation and the cake and the projector, had left him with a strange feeling, a mixture of relief and emptiness, as if he had dropped a heavy burden but didn't know where to go next. He quietly gathered his things, his laptop, a few changes of clothes, his documents. He had no intention of staying in this house, where every corner was a reminder of betrayal. His lawyer, whom he had contacted before dinner, had already prepared everything necessary for the divorce. The application had been filed, and now all that was left was to wait for the bureaucracy to do its job. Alex rented a small apartment in the city center in an old brick building overlooking the river. It was a temporary refuge, a place where he could begin to put himself back together, piece by piece. When he came down to the living room, the morning light was already filtering through the curtains, faded and pale, like an old photograph. Maria was sitting on the edge of the sofa, wrapped in a blanket, like armor against her own guilt. Her eyes were puffy from crying, her skin pale, and her hair disheveled, as if from a sleepless night. The chain with the star still glittered around her neck, a bright reminder of another life in which they had been husband and wife. She raised her head, and something like hope, extinguished by pain, flashed across her face. "Alex," she said, almost in a whisper, "please, Let's talk. I know I messed everything up, but I don't want to lose everything. Alex paused for a few seconds. He had a bag with his laptop and a change of clothes in his hand. He wasn't going to return until the evening. His face was calm, but his eyes were impenetrable. There was no anger or pain in them, only emptiness. No, his voice was even, as if cutting with cold. We talked yesterday. I said everything I wanted. You did too. There's nothing more to discuss. Maria inhaled sharply, as if he had hit her with words. She jumped up, the blanket slipping off her shoulders, but she did not notice. She took a step towards him, and he mechanically retreated, as if an invisible boundary had suddenly appeared between them. He pressed the bag to himself like a shield and continued. You can pick up your things today. I don't want to leave like this, she whispered, almost losing her voice. But you left, Maria. Just earlier. I caught up with you, that's all. He paused. I'll be back in the evening. Leave the keys on the table. She opened her mouth to say something else, but met his gaze direct, even, final. All she could say, she had already said. All she could destroy, she had destroyed. There was no husband next to him anymore. Only a man who understood that the only way to survive was to leave. Maria sank back onto the sofa as if someone's hands had pushed her down. She nodded, without words, without drama. Alex turned slowly and walked out into the hallway. His steps were heavy but sure. He didn't look back. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't slam the door, just a soft, discreet click, like a period at the end of a long, painful sentence. All day Maria tried to contact him. First came the messages, dozens, one after another, full of apologies, pleas, promises to change. Alex, I know I don't deserve to be forgiven, but give me a chance to explain, she wrote. I didn't mean for this to happen. I love you. Each word was a sting, but Alex didn't respond. He opened his phone app and blocked her number, his fingers shaking with a mixture of anger and relief. Then she started texting from another number, probably Sarah's or Helen's, but he blocked that too. Messenger messages, emails, even an attempt to call her on his work phone, he cut her off, methodically cutting her off. He didn't want to hear her voice, didn't want to see her words. Each message was an attempt to pull him back into the lie he'd lived for too long. By the time he returned to the house that evening, Maria was gone. Her things were gone from the bedroom. Clothes, books, even her favorite owl mug. Her keys were on the table, next to a note. I'm sorry. I'm going to my parents. If you change your mind, you know where to find me. Alex crumpled the note and threw it in the trash. He wouldn't change his mind. He knew forgiveness was possible, but it wasn't for him, not after she'd spent months building another life behind his back. He walked through the house, checking to see if she had left anything behind. The living room still smelled of Helen's apple pie, and the table still bore the traces of last night's dinner wine stains, bread crumbs. He cleaned everything up, moving mechanically, as if he were wiping away not just dirt, but memories as well. When the house was clean, he sat down on the sofa and, for the first time that day, allowed himself to exhale. The emptiness inside him was enormous, but somehow liberating. He was no longer the husband, deceived and blind. He was simply Alex, a man starting over. A week passed. Alex was settling into his new apartment, which was small but cozy, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the river, glistening in the sunset. He bought a few things: a new coffee table, a lamp with a soft glow, a couple of books to fill the shelves. His office work became his anchor. He buried himself in spreadsheets and reports, finding comfort in their predictability. Matt, his coworker, tried to bring up what had happened, but Alex brushed him off, saying he wanted to put it behind him. He didn't want pity. He wanted to move on. His friends and family called, offering support. Helen sent a long letter, full of apologies for Maria's behavior and promises that she would always think of him as a son. Sarah stopped by his new apartment with a box of donuts and an awkward hug, telling him that Maria had gone to live with her parents in the next town over and was looking like a ghost. Alex nodded, but didn't ask. He didn't want to know how she was coping. Her pain was her own, just as his pain was his. On Saturday morning, exactly a week after the dinner, Alex decided to go back to Awakening. It wasn't just a cafe, it was the place where his personal catastrophe had begun, and now he wanted to take it back, turn it into a space where he could feel free. He put on his favorite blue jacket, grabbed his laptop, and walked there, enjoying the crisp autumn air. Willow Creek was waking up. Kids were riding bikes, old ladies were walking their dogs, and the coffee shops and stores were filling with the morning bustle. When he walked into Awakening, the familiar scent of coffee and freshly baked goods washed over him like an old friend. Casey, the barista with a green streak, stood behind the counter, her face lighting up when she saw him. "Alex," she called, wiping her hands on her apron. "Haven't seen you in a while. How are you?" "Better," he said, and it was true. He felt lighter, as if the weight of betrayal was beginning to dissolve, leaving room for something new. Black coffee, as usual, and maybe something sweet. Casey nodded, her eyes glittering as if she knew more than she was letting on. "I have an idea," she said with a wink. "Give me a few minutes." Alex took his old table by the window, but this time he didn't hide behind the newspaper. He opened his laptop, but instead of working, he began writing not a report, not a letter, but something personal, almost a diary. He wrote down his thoughts about the last week, about the pain that still lived inside him, but was no longer as sharp. He wrote about how strange it was to feel free when everything you knew had collapsed. This wasn't for someone else, it was for himself, a way to make sense of the chaos of his emotions. Casey returned with a tray, a steaming cup of coffee, and a small box similar to the one that had changed his life. He looked at her with mild surprise, and she smiled, setting the box down in front of him. "Open it," she said, and there was something conspiratorial in her voice. Alex opened the box and froze. Inside was a cake, not the chocolate mousse he'd had that time, but a lemon tart topped with swirls of meringue. Written on the box in Casey's neat handwriting was, "For the one who couldn't forgive the lies." He looked at her, and she shrugged, her smile warm but with a hint of mischief. "I thought you'd like it," she said. "No tigers, no smileys. Just, you deserve something nice." Alex laughed for the first time in a long time, and it was like a breath of fresh air. "Thank you, Casey," he said, feeling something inside him thaw. "This is perfect." He sat in a cafe, looking out at the river, at the people going about their business, at the world that kept moving despite his personal disaster. The tart lay before him, and the inscription on the box was a reminder. He had chosen not to forgive lies, not because he was cruel, but because he valued himself. He took a bite, and its sweet and sour taste was a metaphor for his new life, bitter, but with the promise of something bright. Casey went back behind the counter, but gave him a supportive look. Alex knew the road ahead would be long. Divorce, loneliness, having to rebuild himself, it was all terrifying. But at that moment, sitting in the cafe with a cake and coffee, he felt free. Not happy, not yet, but free. And this was a start. Thank you for listening to the end. If you like this story, please support it with a like and a comment. It really inspires us to create new episodes. Be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story. It will definitely surprise you. See you soon, and may your life be filled with more good stories. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.